The year was 1944. The island of Leyte, Philippines. A field hospital set up in the ruins of what used to be a schoolhouse. Canvas walls, wooden floors soaked with blood, and a general who was about to walk through the door. General Douglas MacArthur did not visit field hospitals often. His aides had advised against it. The conditions were extreme, the casualties overwhelming, and the Japanese had been pushing back harder than anyone expected. But MacArthur had heard something. A report had reached him that morning that he could not ignore. He arrived at 0600 hours with 2 aides and no announcement. What he saw inside that building stopped him in the doorway. There were men on every surface. Cots, stretchers, bare floor, bandages black with blood, the smell of antiseptic mixing with something far worse. And in the center of it all, moving between patients with quiet precision, was a nurse who looked like she had not slept in 4 days. Because she hadn't. Her name was Lieutenant Frances Slanger, United States Army Nurse Corps, 45th Field Hospital Unit. She was 29 years old and had been working that post for 31 hours straight. MacArthur stepped inside. His aide moved to announce him. MacArthur raised one hand, and the aide went silent. He stood there and watched her work. She was changing the dressing on a soldier who had lost part of his left arm. The soldier was conscious, barely, and she was speaking to him in a voice so low MacArthur couldn't hear the words. Only the tone. Calm, steady, like she was talking him back from somewhere very far away. Then something happened. A military administrator appeared from a side room. A major. He had arrived from a rear command post 2 hours earlier, carrying a directive from a supply officer further up the chain. The directive stated that all non-essential personnel were to be evacuated from the forward hospital zone. The front line had shifted overnight. The area was now classified as a contested zone. The major moved directly toward Lieutenant Slanger. He said her name once. She didn't look up. He said it again. She pressed fresh gauze against the soldier's wound and held it there with both hands. The major stepped closer. His voice dropped, but the words were clipped and precise. Lieutenant, you have been issued a direct evacuation order. You are to gather your personal effects and report to the transport staging area immediately. She still didn't look up. This soldier will bleed out if I move my hands right now, she said. So I'm not moving my hands. The major's jaw tightened. He looked at the soldier on the cot. He looked back at her. There are other personnel who can take over. There aren't, she said. There are 2 nurses left in this building and one of them is in surgery. So, unless you want to hold this yourself, I suggest you step back. The major stepped back. But he didn't leave. He stood there, arms rigid at his sides, and waited. MacArthur had not moved from his position near the door. His aides exchanged a look. He ignored them. 12 minutes passed. Slanger finished securing the dressing, checked the soldier's pulse, noted something on his chart, and then stood up and turned around. That was the moment she saw the general standing in her hospital. She did not flinch. She did not come to attention. She was too tired for either. General, she said. Lieutenant, MacArthur said. The major straightened immediately. General MacArthur, I was in the process of issuing an evacuation directive to this nurse. The zone has been reclassified overnight and... I heard you, MacArthur said. The major stopped. MacArthur looked at Slanger. He looked at the room around her, at the rows of men, at the blood on the floor, at the 2 4 lines she had running simultaneously between patients she hadn't had time to leave. He walked slowly toward the center of the room. No one spoke. He stopped at the cot of a young soldier who had been hit by mortar shrapnel. The boy was no older than 19. His eyes were open and fixed on the ceiling. MacArthur stood over him for a moment, then looked back at Slanger. How long has this boy been like this? 6 hours, she said. He's stable now. He wasn't this morning. Who stabilized him? She said nothing. The answer was obvious. MacArthur turned to the major. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. That was the thing people who had served under him remembered most. He never shouted when it mattered. The quieter he got, the more dangerous the room became. Major, he said. What is your name? The major gave his name. And this directive you're carrying, Who issued it? The major explained the chain. Supply command. Rear post. Zone reclassification protocol. MacArthur nodded slowly. He clasped his hands behind his back. I see. He paused. And in your estimation, Major, is this hospital currently treating men who will die if evacuated prematurely? The major hesitated. That is not within my area of... Yes or no? Silence. Yes, sir. And yet you issued the directive anyway. The major said nothing. MacArthur walked back toward the door. He stopped once, turned, and looked at Lieutenant Slanger. She was already moving to the next patient. She had not waited for the conversation to end. There were still men who needed her. He watched her for a moment. Then he said, to no one in particular, she's right where she's supposed to be. He turned to his aide. Get me the commanding officer of the rear supply post on the radio. That evacuation directive is suspended for this facility until further notice. In writing, today. The aide nodded and moved quickly. MacArthur looked once more at the major. You're dismissed. The major left. The hospital continued. The sounds resumed. The quiet work of keeping men alive in impossible conditions continued exactly as it had before MacArthur walked through the door. Because for Lieutenant Slanger, nothing had changed. The men on those cots were the only directive she had ever needed. 3 weeks later, on the 21st of October 1944, Lieutenant Francis Slanger was killed when German artillery shells struck the 45th Field Hospital during a night bombardment. She was 29 years old. She died of her wounds early the following morning. The night before she was killed, she had written a letter. It was addressed to a military publication called Stars and Stripes. In it, she wrote about the American soldier, about his courage and his grace and his quiet dignity in the worst moments any human being could face. She wrote that serving those men had been the greatest honor of her life. The letter was published weeks after her death. It was read aloud in hospitals across the Pacific Theater. Soldiers who had never met her wept when they heard it. She became the first American servicewoman killed in the European theater of operations after the D-Day invasion. A Liberty ship was named after her. Her name was carried forward. MacArthur said very little publicly about the morning in the Leyte Field Hospital. But those who were present said he spoke of it privately, more than once. Of the nurse who didn't look up when a general walked in because there was a soldier whose life depended on her hands staying exactly where they were. Some people are positioned by rank. Some people are positioned by something that cannot be given a rank. Francis Slanger knew the difference. And on that morning, so did Douglas MacArthur. There are men buried in the Pacific who are alive in some form because she refused to move. That is not a metaphor. That is a record. She didn't need a general's approval to do what was right. But it matters that the general recognized it. It matters that he stood in that doorway and watched, and understood what he was looking at. There are moments in war when the most powerful person in the room is not the one with the most stars on his collar. She never left her post, not that morning, not ever. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below with the word "times" stayed. Every story like this one deserves to be remembered. If you want to hear more stories like hers, you know what to do.